Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of UNESCO Talks. I'm your host, Gabby Menezes. This interview takes place on the International Day of Reflection on the genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. Our guest, Freddy Mutanguha, is the CEO of the Aegis Trust as well as a genocide survivor. He survived the genocide as a teenager and later looked after his remaining family. Freddy, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about the events that led to the genocide?
Thank you very much for having me. 31 years ago, Rwanda experienced the most extreme violence, the genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994. This was not a spontaneous event. It was so well prepared and carefully prepared by the extremist Hutu government. And they were very much supported because international media portrayed this conflict as a tribing war. But it was not true because the Hutu, the farmers, the Tutsi, the cattle holders and Twa, they lived in my country in harmony together for centuries. They shared everything. We spoke the same language, the same culture, with the same religion. The intermarriage was possible. It was even possible to move from one socio-economic identification to another one. But this was stopped when the colonial period came, where the colonial masters introduced the division and including the politics of divide and rule. The identity card was established, and it was not possible to make any movement because for a generation, when they give you an identity card, you become a Tutsi for generation.
So we have the colonial government that really created these tensions between people. Can you talk about how this kind of came to be violent or express itself in violence?
The first wave of violence in 1959 was supported by colonial power, supporting the extremist government of Hutu. And these people took the remaining Tutsis, those who didn't have a chance or were not lucky enough to leave the country. They were called all the names. They were called enemies of the country. They were called cockroaches and snakes, and those people for the government actually deserve to be killed and to be exterminated.
So this vision of Tutsis being enemies of the state, of being labeled in propaganda as insects or cockroaches, is this something that sort of continued to 1994?
And this, of course, continued in 1994 because the Tutsi in my country, they were considered by extremist government as the people from outside the country, the foreigners. And this came when the scientists of colonial masters actually put a theory about the Hamitic ideology. So the government embraced it, and they used it to exterminate and to really deprive the right of the Tutsis in my country. So this persecution of the Tutsis continued until 1994, where I can say that was final solution, where 1 million of Tutsi in only 100 days, they were killed in my country.
And you were 18 years old, you had a family. Can you tell us a bit what happened to them in your experience during this period?
That was on 7th of April, when we woke up in the morning and we find out that all the streets of my village was full of roadblocks. It was not possible to escape at all. And we had a small meeting at my house. And my mom advised me to leave my house and go to hide with my colleague at primary school. His name is Peter. Peter was a very good friend, very close to me. He was a Hutu and born in a Hutu family. And he was not targeted. So I went to his house and he hid me in under his bed. So this was a poor family. And my mom used to sneak each and every night to come to Peter's house and bring me food and tell me what is happening at home. And each and every day, the militias used to attack my family. And but my family, I used to give them food and give them money so that they couldn't kill them. The food and money saved my life for 1 week. And that was not longer than that. So after 1 week, my mom came to me. It was the 13th of April, and she was completely different. When you look at her eyes, and she was hopeless. She looked at me and say, "My son, if you survive, be a man." And he was very, very strong in my tradition that means a lot to tell your child to be a man. That means that you may be alone, but you still keep strong. So I was not really understanding what she's meant. But that was true, because next day...
What did you find out happened to your family?
Yes, the next day, on the 14th of April, the militias actually attacked my house and killed everyone at my house, including my parents and my 4 sisters. Only one sister survived because she ran away, and she was so fast. And one of the neighbors hid her in her house. They couldn't follow her because they were actually looking for my parents and see if they can even root and try to take money or anything they can take from my house. So that's how my sister escaped. But I heard that she was my parents. They were killed with machetes and the clubs. And this was true because a few months later, in October, I exhumed their bodies, and they found a lot of cuts in their heads and skulls. But my sister were thrown into a long pit, septic tank, alive, and they were killed by throwing the stones on top of their heads. What is really horrible is the fact that Peter's house and my house was very close to each other, and I could hear the voices until they finished my sisters, until they died.
And how did you find out about what happened to your family? Did you understand what was going on as it was happening because you could hear them?
We were killed by our neighbors. We were killed by people who knew who we are and where we are and what we grew up with their children together. So after genocide, because what happened is that the person who saved my sister, that person connected with Peter, and we connected with my sister too, and a group of friends. They helped us to escape the region where they knew us. So for my sisters, because they were screaming a lot, and they were screaming in the very long septic tank, I could hear that they're killing them. I wouldn't really understand how they're killing them, but when I came back in the village 3 months later, people who were there, they start telling me the stories. Even they told me where they buried my parents and where they buried my sisters. But my sisters were already into that hole, which I had to dig and then exhume their bodies. So the story was not really difficult to understand, because people who were there, my neighbors that I knew, they were telling me the stories.
So you came back 3 months after the genocide had ended. You wanted to find out what happened to your family, but you ended up staying in Rwanda. What was going through your head? Why would you stay in a place where your family had been destroyed?
Yeah, I stayed in Rwanda, but I didn't stay in the same village where I grew up. It was difficult that time. I had to make my life in the town. And it was really also another journey, because when I went to Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda, I didn't know anyone. And the people I knew who were related before, they were all killed as well. Because when I found out that my uncle who was living in Kigali, he was also killed. But I have to help myself, and being in this town and being in the city, having a Red Cross car, dropping you in big city and with a cloud of people, and you don't know whether you go right or left. You don't know which road you take. You don't know if you take a taxi or work. So that was a situation that I actually was in when I reached Kigali, capital city. But I was actually lucky enough to find my way. And a few months later, I went back to school. But before I do that, I went back to my village, and I heard all the stories, but also I was able to exhume the bodies of my families. And this was very, very important for me as well, because psychologically I felt really separated with them, because I didn't see them. I didn't see them where they were killing them. I was in my mind even doubting if they were all killed or died. Of course I knew, because I heard the screaming, but I was not separated completely with them. But the fact that I was able to bury them and cry for them and mourn for them, that was very, very important for me.
So, Freddy, you now work for the Aegis Trust, but you're also director of the Kigali Memorial for the Genocide. Can you tell me a little bit about how you think a country, a society can heal from an event like this? Because this is what you have been working on really since you were 18.
Yeah, it's a miracle that a country that experienced such atrocity can stand up again. When you look at what happened in my country, right after genocide in 1994, we find ourselves in a country without the professionals, because, for example, my mom was a teacher. So many teachers were killed, and so many teachers have been in exile, because those extremist government that was defeated by our peer soldiers, they took in hostage the civilians and the professionals, and they took them outside the country. So the country was empty of professionals inside. We didn't have enough medical professionals. We didn't have lawyers. So the economy was really below zero. It was really a horrible situation, and it was really nearly failed state. So we were lucky to have, because those who defeated the government, who fought the government, who stopped the genocide, they are the children of the Tutsi who fled the country in 1959. But looking at actually people abusing their own families that had been left in the country, looking how the country was governed, they decided to take arms. But they were able to defeat the government after 3 months of genocide, while after 1 million Tutsi were killed. So the leader of this army that defeated the government he is very, very strong man, and who instead of promoting revenge, he decided to be a president, or to be a leader of all Rwandans. It was really amazing to see even the soldiers who've been fighting in the bush to the RPS soldiers, they were brought back and integrated in the national army. That was the first time and the first actions that really brought people together. But also we had to think about the reconciliation. We had to think about justice. We need to think about how to support vulnerable survivors. And the leadership have been really contributing a lot to make this country standing up again, and see people are coming also in unity together again.
And how do you feel personally? Do you forgive the Hutus who did this to your family? How do you who have had such traumatic thing happen to you, how do you manage to live with the people who committed these crimes against you?
This is a general sentiment of survivors who really made a huge contribution to what is going on in Rwanda today, when they decided to not revenge, but to bring humanity despite what happened to them. So from my perspective, I was supported, and also I was lucky to work for Kigali Genocide Memorial to be able to understand the how the underlying cause of genocide, the steps to genocide, how people were indoctrinated on hate ideology, and for me, I felt that my contribution, as I understood, and I keep talking about, and I had a responsibility to tell the stories. My responsibility now is to forgive what happened to my country, people who have done it, so that I can help others to take this road of forgiveness. So this is really very important, and it's a sentiment that we shared with many survivors, and it's really a contribution we can make to this nation so that it can stand up again, and we can find a peaceful world and country where our families and our children and our grandchildren can live in.
Freddy, UNESCO is doing a lot of work with education for peace, but what we're finding is that in many countries that have experienced conflict, that have experienced something traumatic, teachers have their own traumatic experiences to deal with. Do you have any advice on how they can deal with these experiences, these traumatic experiences, before trying to teach about education and peace?
What we realize, that is true, because it also happened in my country, where everyone has a story, and the genocide actually affected everyone in my country. So the teachers, they're facing this challenge, because they're talking and teaching about their own story, or they are partly impacted by their story. So what the advice we give, that's actually what we do, because we all talk about it. The teachers need to be equipped. The teachers themselves, before they start talking about their stories and talking about the teaching, they need to be equipped with the social and emotional learning, because they need to understand about the self, and they need to understand how to manage their emotions, which is very, very important. It's a lesson itself, because we need to support our teachers as well. But also in teaching, the teachers need to be facilitators, not actually lecturing what actually history tells. Because what we realize through storytelling, when you ask someone to tell the story and their own experience, and having some skills of active listening among the teachers and also the students, this helps people to listen carefully. And what I realize, instead of talking about heavy story as a teacher, you learn and you facilitate the discussion and the conversations. But at the same time, it's also not a guarantee, if I can say, because we need to make sure that that's storytelling. It's also accompanied by a psychologist who can really help to manage the emotions in the classroom. And this is what we do back in the country, where we let all students and the teachers themselves to recount what they experienced, so that each and everyone become a teacher. It's not really the teacher themselves. They have to tell the story themselves. They have to lecture what happened, but through the storytelling, people really learn from each other. And so the storytelling is one of the approach that need to be adapted. But another very important aspect is to equip the teachers with the social and emotional learning, so that they can be able to manage to have the safe awareness and self management in terms of their own emotions.
In Rwanda, you now have generations of children, some who were survivors, some who are descended from perpetrators of the violence, and it is understandable that tensions could arise between these two groups. Do you have any advice for teachers on how to manage this situation?
Yes, right. Again, this is an experience we went through peace education program in Rwanda, where we have children of perpetrators and children of survivors in the same classroom, learning about the history of genocide, learning about the history of the country. So, and this is really a challenging situation, and we had to deal with it for many years to find a way to go. So what we realized is that by becoming one of the facilitator, not actually lecturing, was the best way to do at this to manage your classroom. But at the same time, each and everyone need to be given time to speak, and not feeling that you're learning from your teacher, but you're learning from your colleagues. That's what happened when we and then what you realize when survivors were talking and talk about their pain and talking about the really horrible experience they went through, or the horrible experience their parents went through, the children of perpetrators were listening, but they were given a chance to talk about their own pain, talking about how they visit their parent in a prison, or how their life in refugee camps and everything. So the children of survivors, what they realize, they didn't know that the children of perpetrators also suffer. They thought they're so privileged because they didn't experience genocide. They thought that they are really lucky children. So by listening to each other, by listening to from a pain from each other, the creation of empathy was there. And we find actually in the classroom that when you manage to create the empathy, and also we need to have that skills on how do you bring empathy to your classroom, but how do you that values and skills or empathy, how is it developed in a classroom, which is very important. And there is a whole lesson about this one. It's very, very important that and to make sure that the students can go into the shoes of others and understand it. So the only way is to leave everyone speak, and speak freely, is to create a very conducive and safe environment to talk about your own story, is to be given really enough time, not cut short actually what they're saying. Don't say that there's no time, you have to leave someone to talk and cry if they're full of emotions. And once everyone have given a space to talk, that empathy that's created into classrooms helps the teacher to understand how to deal with that class. I think with the storytelling, with empathy learning, and with teachers being facilitators, combining those three, you can manage a class with students with different backgrounds.
Freddy, thank you so much for speaking so openly about your story. It was really interesting and very, very moving. And thank you for joining us for this episode of UNESCO Talks. As always, please leave any comments and questions in the chat and we will get back to you.